actually can't use the cursor app. I feel a little bad to do some of the skill file stuff. I'll try and see if it kind of turns back on, but I didn't want to sign up just for the talk. But I wanted to talk about techniques that are cross-platform, that work on your local machine, on servers, and that's why I'm actually really proud or really excited about Markdown files. But before we go into Markdown files, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about myself and who is this guy anyway, and some foundational techniques that I see, just so you can kind of grok sort of like where I come from as a professional. Okay, so I'm a networks person. I've been a networks person for a long time. So this is a dude playing with networks and he's uploading networks onto the internet, and he has hair sort of like me. I used to be an artist. I still am an artist actually, and I wrote a book and I made a video game and did live audience making, and I thought I was going to be a full-time artist, and then I kind of fell in love with AI. So I got my bachelor and then my master's, or my bachelor in software engineering, I got my master's, and I got really excited about what I like to call like emergent intelligence or emergent systems, and I studied it's really digital harmony, so I was really interested in if you got like a collection of people and robots, to what extent could they pursue their own desires and also make good things happen in life, you know? A tension between the economy or a tension between the environment and individual autonomy. So I've always been really curious about what it would take theoretically to have what we call in literature convergent policies, or policies that make people happy and make the world a better place at the same time. So group harmony and social harmony. So I worked on that for a long time. I did a startup, did okay doing that, and then recently, in recent years, the whole AI boom happened. And I took sort of my experience in networks, and I took my experience in software, and my experience in art, and I kind of jumped headfirst into artist collaborations, where I do work with brands and teams about like AI workflows. So I'm very passionate with the future of interactive media. I think like narrative storytelling is changing. At the same time, I work with engineering clients, and I'm really also excited about the degree to which we can automate a lot of the service layer and the plumbing of our everyday lives. So with that, this is kind of a cool slide about creativity and kind of a launch-off point for this technical talk, because the creative process or the software development process both flow from inspiration to deployment and to hosting. And I made a hosting solution once, so this is like a really weird way to plug it, but that's kind of like, you know, I was really into servers for a long time. And when it comes to figuring out how to empower yourself with agents, it takes a lot of self-actualization. And so different people have different proclivities on your team. Some people are very detail-oriented, some people are very interested in standards and documentation. Some people are very creative, they always have new ideas. And I think a lot of people end up delegating tasks to agents that they're actually really great at because they're familiar with how to delegate those tasks, and they struggle and they get stuck because then they end up with more tasks that they hate. So I think like knowing where you are on a creativity spectrum, if you're a person who's really great at organizing meetings, or you're a person that's like very social, or you're a person that's very technical, knowing where to put AI in your workflow and then adopting the tools that gap fill you as a person to get things out of your way is a key strategy. And that kind of brings me into what I wanted to talk about, which was skill files. And so skill files are interesting to me, and this is where I wanted to do some actual whiteboarding. Skill files are interesting to me because they actually touch this concept of, yeah, how do I make that go away? Does anyone? If I want to do whiteboard stuff.
Just move it on this side.
Yeah, move to the side.
Oh, just do it on the side? Okay, yeah, that's easier.
Look it to the side here.
Got it, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I wrote down some notes. I'm a very tactile person, and I wanted to sort of talk about the different psychological frameworks that go into designing skill files, and then how we can think about breaking them down and sharing them as a team. So just to sort of break the drudgery, does anyone feel like telling me what they like to do with skill file automation? Like when you sit down and you think, I'm going to write out a skill file, or I'm going to write down a markdown file, what does that, like what do you write out? categorize that as a workflow for you?
I'm just doing it repetitively over and over again, so I can set it into it exactly.
Maybe. Okay, so you have a repetitive thing. So and what would you define a workflow as? I'm just curious, because these are like emerging definitions.
Yeah, I think a workflow would just be something like that just happens repetitively over and over, and it has a clear set of steps, and it has like divergent steps as well that can happen based on conditions. Kind of like a complex workflow. But yeah, basically.
And so this is a good one, and this is like a really fun one, because I also really like workflows. And I think workflows are a very good example of a very reliable and repetitive process, right? They're repetitive or reliable. They're reliable because once you build something into a workflow that's multi-stage and you've separated it into discrete steps, you can tie observability into these layers, right? And I want to talk about that and like what that means in a minute. But I do think that like workflows are a key psychological artifact that we can all think about in our lives. And that's like one kind of way to delegate to AI, and it's an interesting one. Does anyone else delegate? So when you're is it only workflows? Is anyone using AI for anything other than workflows?
I'm using agents to brainstorm quite a bit for things like catching edge cases or even bringing outside sources.
100%. So you've got, let's do like a cool eye. It's not really cool. So yeah, you can have agents watching external resources for you, external databases, and then moving that data somewhere. And it can be very exponential. So you can have this process, this skill file, or this context, this concept, force agents to repeatedly start up, and these little discrete processes can explore several databases. So search and discovery is definitely another primary one. Any others? Okay, and then I'm just curious, how do you set that up? What separates that from, say, a workflow?
I normally just put in a prompt of what I want and what type of features I want, and I just say that I want purity and any of the complications.
Got it.
Any models or architecture.
And how do you evaluate when it's done, and how many stages do they have? This is a trick question.
I notice you can have multiple phases, like phase one would be just brainstorm, and then until the final phase would be just direct deployment and then integrate with the application. Mainly, I always have 1 to 8 phases. Each phase has its own small task. Once it's complete, we have a full integration done.
Exactly. These little weird icons are pieces of paper, they're skill files, and we'll make them special. And so there are probably more uses, like I don't think we'll get them all. But that's kind of what I was trying to say with the creativity slide, is that, and what made you choose documentation?
Documentation, because no one likes writing documentation. It's like the most boring part of all platforming. So like have AI do documentation, you can do the fun stuff.
Totally. So these are actually I would say that these are like good 3 canonical examples to work with, because one of them is about discovery. One of them is about open-ended exploration or play. I would call this intermediate layer, play, delegation. I don't know, I'm running sideways. It's easier for me, but hard for everyone else. And then I would say on this end, we have repetitive workflows. So keeping with this interactive theme, when do we think that there would be a good time to use these different techniques? I have some of my personal ideas, but it's kind of funny if anyone wants to guess. Or have their own idea.
I'll say discovery should be first, and then the delegation, and then the work.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. I think there's more context in this because these three pillars, like discovery, play, and experimentation, and then I would say like standardization, they mirror quite well with like aspects of this flip. So that would be so cool. So if we keep these ideas around discovery, play, delegation, and then repeatable workflows, we kind of realize that these are like, there are more pillars or there are more categories, but this is like an interesting dividing line to think about a person's affinity or skill set in AI. So when I first started getting the skill files, I'm a control freak, I was like, no, I'm not doing any of this weird, like no thinking models, I'm not going to put my thing on codex, I want everything running locally, I actually started making I still am making my own like node-based processing engines, and I wanted everything to be a workflow. And that's really cool because you can take your workflows and you can version control them in GitHub. You can have each of the stages be a skill file, and you can control things, but then you have a lot of technical burden. You have to maintain those things almost like they're scripts. And then it also begs the question like, why is this not a code file? So this is kind of when thinking about how to design a multi-stage workflow. I think coming at the core problem first from an understanding of like why you're solving a certain problem in the first place and what you stand to gain from solving the problem is probably really critical. So if you try to solve, and I'm working with a great company right now, and they have a reliability problem with one of their like agent products. And they've structured their agent product fundamentally around play and delegation, which is their agent, and this is kind of a good case study, so I'll talk about it a little bit, but their agent is supposed to review very large data sets and give mission critical results that can be like legally important to other people, right? So it's supposed to quality data sets, and the way the agent was built is that the agent actually grabs a few documents, reads the documents, builds its own context, and after it builds its own context, so it's done a review step, what happens, and it's kind of fun, I think engineers love the version. So someone had a great idea, they're like, well, have it try to go another step and then repeat. And so what happens over time is something that we're familiar with in control theory, which is the context slowly starts to change, and by the time you get to like step 15, you get very stochastic and unreliable results. Because even a 5% drift in the quality of your parameters, if you're doing 15 iterations, and the agent has the autonomy to craft its own focus, craft its own data sets, it's going to be very hard to measure accuracy, right? So if you're designing a product and you end up in a situation where you fundamentally picked the wrong problem-solving paradigm for your skill files or for your agents, there's no magical tool that's going to make this exponential process that grows more inaccurate over time. It's going to be very hard to clamp down on that inaccuracy, right? So in control theory, they call it dead reckoning problem, but there's different terms for all sorts of different domains of mathematics for a process that samples itself. In machine learning, they call it concept drift, right? Similarly, workflow and repetitive workflows are really great for mission critical tasks. If you can identify a substructure of your work and it has 2 or 3 repeated steps, and you're doing them all the time, then you can take your skill files and pair them up with like a little Python file, and then you can run unit tests against these and gather stats, and you can gather measurables, and you can even do grid-based optimization on your workflows, and you can get very good performance out of your large language model workflows by treating them like small machine learning processes, right? It just depends where your head's at and what your product needs are, right? And discovery is always a hard problem because it's usually the information you're trying to discover is valuable and it's either mined out or everyone already knows it, or it's a challenging problem for a lot of reasons. Depends on the domain you're in and what you're into. But discovery products can be quite challenging. So any sort of like event listing service or like a research bot can generally start to get poor results pretty quickly, and that's kind of a phenomenon. Okay, so I wanted to sort of today talk a little bit about some of the little skill files I use for these purposes. I actually don't really have good skill files for discovery. Now that who brought the discovery up? Okay. Oh, let's go. But yeah, discovery. I think there's something over here. But it's funny. In hearing the examples, I was like, oh, I don't really have any techniques for this. I just use the internet stuff and search things. But I have a lot of techniques for agents to explore, and I have a lot of techniques for agents to constrain their behavior. But I wanted to talk about the frameworks first before I started talking about any sort of technical skill sets. Does anybody have any questions before I talk about maybe more nerdy stuff, or would you rather? I guess show of hands. Who would rather talk about bigger ideas and theoretical consequences, or who would rather look at skill files and look at code? Okay, I don't want to ask you two questions at once. Who would rather? Who would like to just chat more and think more about frameworks and cognitive models? Okay. And who would like to talk more about skill files and examples? Okay, cool. Let's do it. So I actually have 4 example skill files I really like. I'm going to turn myself slightly sideways because it's actually easier for me to see. Yeah. Sure, let's keep going. I have a very loud voice as well. Okay. My mouse is very small and trapped on a screen on it. Sorry, I'll be patient. I literally can't find my mouse. Oh, there it is, yeah. You can tell that I was a window person. Oh my god, it's this tiny little square up near the top right. That's hilarious. Okay. Very loudly. Okay, so starting from the top, I think a good elementary technique is something I call a ratchet, and also I think it would be cool to have time at the end to talk about other people's cool little skill file tricks too. I'm sure people use this one, but I just wanted to mention it because it's actually very, very powerful. So I have this little Pong game I built, and I built this Pong game, and I just one-shotted it, and it works fine. It's functional. It's great. And you know, I think like all people, you have a certain way you like your code to be, or you might not like it like this. And so the question I used was just, I think there was a sentence at the top. I'm sure there was a sentence at the top saying "make a Pong game." You might have got lost in the translation, but deliver everything in one file. I can open up in the browser and play Pong, whatever I want, blah blah blah, and it makes Pong. That's fine. And then what I actually did with this prompt is I just said, hey, when you write your Pong game, just keep this code proposal in mind. And I'm sure everyone knows this, but it's just such a powerful technique. I'll talk about a few ways to use the technique, just so people don't kind of forget about the power of this elementary technique. So when you're including like your own skill files, you can install them as a skill in whatever tool you're using. You can reference them and say, hey, go look at this. Or you can actually print the skill file in one. And there are different advantages to each. And it's just worth spending a second thinking about the consequences. So when something's installed as a skill file in your tool, you're relying on the tool's heuristics to decide when that makes it into context, how often it makes it into context, where in the context, like where in the text. How many people are like very familiar with what context is in LMS? Yeah, I might spend a second on it after. But yeah, so you're leaving it up to a heuristic or another processor to decide where in your workflow this file gets embedded. That might be okay, that might be fine. I'm a bit of a weirdo, I like to have my context empty, or it's as clean as possible. I like to choose where and when I layer in my files. So I like to call them out and either link them in, I call them out like on the prompts I want them, and I'll even automate that. Or if the skill file is really important, I'll deliver the text of the skill file right beside the problem I'm supposed to solve. So it's impossible for the agent to ever have any drift between the skills I want them to use and the application of that skill file. And so I tested it out with this prompt, and I wish I kept the copies. Oh wait, oh there you go. That was deleted. I was like, use that. No, it's okay. So this is just, I like this version more. I'm an old school object-oriented guy. I like that there's like, you know, different constructors and different elements, and a lot of these rules come from do's and don'ts that I keep in this like one-off skill file. The skill file also comes with a mandatory proposal gate. So if I'm chatting with an agent and I'm tossing a skill file, it forces it to provide me a precise GIF with demarked blocks for every action it's going to do, and has a seek explicit approval, which I just find depending on the tool you're using or who's going to use your tool, or what person running whatever machine later. If you embed these skill files, it can build safety into the tools that you build, because it'll force them to ask for it. So just thinking about like having your own little Swiss Army knife, I think most people are doing that now. Yeah, and what? I could go on about that, but it's a really basic concept. Another concept I wanted to talk about is this concept of making your agent an automatic note taker. And this is sort of where I would start introducing the concept of reminders and loops. So in this skill file, it's pretty basic. I won't really jump into that after. But the general idea is that you load the skill file in and you tell it, hey, from now on, at the end of every prompt, I want you to remind yourself that you're supposed to be taking notes. And then just keep reminding yourself, and if you forget, I'll delete the skill file. And then what happens is it comes up with this like repeated reminder to do this compliant activity. And you can, again, build that in the unit test, or you can use it in your terminal, wherever you want. And this ends up creating automatic documentation.
Do you use hooks for these, like Girard code has hooks, so automatically if you run a certain number of prompts, it automatically takes notes?
I use OpenCode, and I do a lot of like hacky stuff with OpenCode to hook in skill files. But I also use a lot of this stuff in unit tests and in other places as well. Or if I'm like onboarding people, I want them to like do a task for me. I'll say, hey, can you please use this skill file while you're working? Because it will automatically document everything, and then we can debrief after, and you don't have to worry about it. So I have a note-taking skill file that's good for doing architectural updates as I work. I have one that's good for doing to-do lists as I work. And over time, I've actually broken the skill files into two pieces. So I have how to take notes, and then I have like a skill, how to take notes as a meta skill, which is just about like how to structure a document, where to put things, how to set everything up. And then I actually attach to one skill file. I will also attach like specific skills. So this is like a note-taking skill file that's focused on being very verbose about all potential consequences that can happen. So you have your core note-taking loop, and then you can attach in like decorators to that skill file like Lego. And then you can have like one meta skill file that's like, okay, I'm a great note taker, but today I'm worried about note taking about statistical anomalies. Today I'm interested in note taking about, you know, whatever. And then you can take that core skill file, how to take notes. And this is where you can start to make some decisions. Because this is now a general artifact. This is generalization. So with an artifact like that, thinking about personal property and digital literacy and all those things, you can think, oh, that's like an artifact of my consciousness. I'm going to take that in my backpack for life, and whenever I have this problem, I'm going to skill file. Cool. You can also decide if you're building a team, that it becomes part of the DNA of some agent that helps manage some part of your operations, right? You can also take that skill file, the base skill file, and you can turn it into an artifact that you share among your team, and it can be a source of like, I can call evergreen intelligence that your team can draw on when you notice there are certain psychological patterns that are drawn upon. So you say, oh, this note-taking skill is very, very good in a bunch of places, right? I'll go through, I might, after I go through the basic skill files and some of these basic examples, actually look at some of the examples from the big repositories I've worked on. Another one, does that make sense, everyone? Is that like, this is pretty... You can yell. Yeah. Oh, man, great questions. I would say for verification, small, measurable steps are better. And that's a great question I can talk about in a second. And I think short run times are important. And definitely evaluations are important. So I think I've noticed that many people romanticize like, oh, I can put this prompt in and like a whole component pops out. And component level is actually fine, I think that's totally reasonable. But when it starts to get to like app level or integration level, I think that's where you get the stochastic nature of LLMs becomes very uncertain. And so I'm a fan of taking those same big problems but chunking them down into series of independently verifiable workflows. So I personally don't feel comfortable scaffolding a project with AI. I feel comfortable setting up a scaffold for a project with AI. And the metaphor I've been using about reliability and robustness, and this is like, I found this to be extremely productive actually. This is more of an architectural thing. Is that I think old school, we think of our API layer, and then we have a front end, and then we have a database. And I think that like AI, when just turned at this problem, you're like, okay, AI starts making endpoints. I think this gets really crazy so fast. I think it's just a horrendous, horrible time. And so what I started doing is I started thinking about like what are some of the common services and common problems that this layer of the software is in charge of. Like what is this thing about? Like what's the API layer about? It's like, okay, well you have authentication. Okay, well we have so authentication, we have maybe some logging. You might have like semaphore or like a concurrency provision. So you're going to have a bucket of core problems, right? So these core problems, what I ended up doing is I started thinking of these core problems as not features in themselves to be developed, but if I realized that almost every endpoint or almost every service is going to have these characteristics, I literally was watching this nature documentary, and I was thinking about like about beehives, and I was thinking that the actual beehive itself is the authentication tools. It is the general class wrapper. It's the empty module directories. It's everything set up so if you dump code in there, it's extremely observable. And then your AI comes by as like a bee, and it just prints a garbage component in there, just like total trash. And you can just nuke the component and rematerialize it with your multi-stage workflows whenever you want. So you're not so stressed about the reliability of what goes inside this, right? You're stressed about the reliability of the scaffold. The scaffold's fine, you can rematerialize any subcomponent. So the real architectural challenge I find is designing workflows and strategies that are good at like one-shot printing of components using one of those like exploratory techniques within a nice place, like within a nice boundary, and very careful surgical workflow techniques that are unit tested and secure to help build and maintain the scaffolding layer. Does that sort of answer? Yeah. And then you can go kind of all ham about how to measure that stuff. So yeah. So when it comes to like maintaining or auditing complicated workflows that are a little stochastic, so research projects or other problems, I think that's where multi-stage workflows are useful. And a multi-stage workflow, and I might actually just find one from another project, because it's kind of nice to look at, but I don't want to. Might not be the best example because not all my crazy tasks run completion. But I wanted to show an example of what a multi-stage workflow looks like, and I'm sure people do these. So I want to talk for a second about the multi-stage skill. So this is just a skill file, and all it does is you can talk to it about a plan. You can even get a plan to the point where it has 25 stages that are all bullet points. And you know, if you say, okay, start working on that plan, it's going to be a total disaster. So what I do now is I have this multi-stage skill plan, and what it does is it takes that like rough plan and it runs it through 3 or 4 states where it does a code review, architecture review, unit testing standards, documentation standards, where's everything stored, and it takes a draft skill file that's unspecified, and it turns it into so this is a progress file. Oh, this is not. Keep all these things around. I should start them for when I have. So it's not bad. So this is a skill file where basically I rammed my code proposal into my multi-stage workflow, and what happens is the skill file ends up being so detailed that I actually have just literal diffs of every edit that's planned for the whole skill file. And then what happens is, as the agent's working, and I go through something like compaction, or I have to give the project to another developer, there's no real learning needed. I can just give them these markdown files, and they can just boot up and continue working where I left off almost instantly, right? So I think, getting set up with that idea that you can break things down into stages and then running them that way is really huge. And the last one I really wanted to get to is, and I talked about it a little bit with looping, or with the task tracking. But when you have a multi-stage plan that's, say, got 25 or 50 steps, and it's going to build a whole application layer, it's going to build a whole API layer, and you've built a ton of API layers with it, you know it's good. You can run it and delegate it with, I guess people used to call them Ralph loops. And who here is familiar with Ralph loops? Anyone do them? Basically, and I'd love to do a demo, but it takes a little bit of setup. But the general idea is that once you load in your multi-stage skill file that's been built out, it's got everything in there, and then you attach your loop file. Once you run one iteration, it just comes back with all the diffs and everything for your approval. You can say, I approve. You can turn on auto approve if you want, and you can just watch the commits kind of flow by. So the reason I chose this progression of skill files is because sort of by mastering these in this order, you get from, oh, I can always ratchet down on my agent. I have a lot of control. I have instant leverage wherever I am. Oh, I know how to track my context as I go through compaction. I can recover my session. It's not a disaster. It doesn't take me 30 minutes every time my agent gets to 80% context. And then, then you can plan larger multi-stage projects. And if you're you know, if you have to go to work or transfer your work, it can be picked up, all the way to, oh, now I can automate the whole deployment of like entire API layers. So that's kind of what the transition here is. And the last thing in the list is just some really cool step skill templates. So, you know, how to set up your Figma stuff, how to like, you know, do a deployment with Ansible, how to study a whole repository and document it. And each of these is just like a multi-stage skill template that can be built up by the multi-stage skill plan. And what happens is you take the general idea of this template, you combine it with a multi-stage skill plan, it studies your repository, and then it contextualizes that skill file for your application you can run it through. So yeah, I'll put that up in GitHub. They're not perfect, but it's kind of what I've discovered so far. I think any questions or anything? Yeah.
With all these rules files, how do you deal with token usage?
How do you deal
with token usage? Like, it seems like a large amount of context.
I feel the better the skill files are, the more preparation you're putting in them, the lower the token usage.
Really?
I feel like one of the biggest problems I have is I'll say, oh, I want this solution to happen. Here's the file, go look at it, and then the agent just starts converting tokens. Whereas if I say, okay, step one, you know, read these 3 key architecture documents, and step 2, do this. Yeah, you burn some tokens, but then it kind of knows exactly the lines of code that has to hit.
I think that also, you know, touches on your point with maybe like, depending on what you're developing, do you provide that rules file to the chat, or do you provide it to the global state of that, you know, your cursor rules? Like, it's important to all.
Yeah.
So is it?
I work in contexts where the work I have to do has to be broadly compatible with a lot of different people and run a very frothy time with agent tools. So that's why I've been using a lot of just markdown files, because I know when I go somewhere, I can give this person this repo, they can install it, they can use it. And if they want to wrap it up as like a cursor formatted skill file and then with the YAML format, cool, I don't care. Or maybe they have plot code, or maybe they want to put it in open plot. They can do whatever they want with it, right? And so I like really general paradigm level languages for that, like, but there is a cost, right? Because it's not in my tool, readily accessible. I'm a little more manual that way.
I think I was just trying to touch on, like, you know, should you try your best to, like, you know, pinpoint a specific rule for what you're trying to achieve in the chat, or should you, you know, have more globally accessible and general purpose rules? Because
that's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning around knowing your strengths, your team's strengths, and what's not going well, and like what you're gonna have local clients with, what you know a lot about, and your what's his name? He's a management theory guy, but there's a great management theory person, I can't remember the name of it right now, but they talk about task relative maturity, and so depending on how you approach a task. When I go to do an API layer, I can write out a step skill for that and then print it out and set up measurables and unit testing and kind of just have it on in the background because APIs, especially in Python, are so easy to do that with. But I can't necessarily do that with a machine learning problem, and I certainly couldn't do that with a book because I don't have like a good psychological framework for those tasks. But somebody else might be like, oh my god, I've written a million pieces. I met a writer recently, and she told me that she automated, you know, massive swaths of her creative writing. She doesn't even see a difference in her writing quality between her and her robot. And I was like, I don't think I have the cognitive skills to do that. So when I use agents in the context of writing, I do a lot more discovery. So I think it depends, right? What you bring to the problem you're facing, which kind of ways agents can force multiply you. Any others?
Do you have any advice or ideas on how to go on autopilot? Because these ones are obviously gone through like a chat or whatnot. How to maintain like autopilot?
How do you make things sort of say again?
Like
On autopilot?
like skills. Autopilot. So like for example, another could say you have skills to like look at your observability, look at your previous templates, stuff like that. How you done it?
Do you mean like one-off tasks through the day, like in class stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think skill files have a place there, and there are ways to install skills in OpenClock. It's just not really a use case I've found myself that interested in. But I do like like scheduling triggers with skill files. So I'll boot up the process and have it auto approve certain things. I think that's really fun. But it just hasn't, I'm such a control freak, I just feel like that's not the way. I'm much more likely to set up 5 threads in a window and watch them all run than I will to like, know that some robot's watching me sleep. I just don't like that. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone? Any others? Cool. Well, I think that's it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming out here. So big round of applause.